Hi, and welcome to Is That Even Constitutional? This is a podcast where we use the lens of the Constitution to dissect current events. My name is Sadhana Devaraja, and I am not a constitutional scholar, but lucky for me, my good friend Ken Thomas is. Hi, Ken. How are you?
Great, Sadhana. How are you?
I am doing well. So, this is our second season, which we're calling the Project 2026 series. And this is the third proposal in an arc where we're setting forth 10 what we believe are winnable proposals that would help us reclaim the Constitution through legislation. So, in the first episode of this series, we covered the filibuster, then in the second episode, gerrymandering, and today we are focusing on the right of access to vote with a proposal to make Election Day a national holiday. So I'll say, compared to gerrymandering and the filibuster, this is a little easier to wrap our heads around. And just wondering, Ken, if you could just walk us first through the relationship between voting and the Constitution.
Sure. So I think the most important thing to realize about the Constitution is it was not designed to resolve or to make policy decisions or to, kind of decide which direction our country was in. The United States Constitution is just a document of powers and limitations on the federal government and to a lesser extent on the state government. The actual implementation of power within that system is a much more complex and political question, and the Constitution will not answer exactly what needs to be done. But one thing we do know is that the system only works if the checks and balances are there. And one of the biggest checks on the United States government is voting by the citizenry. Now, this is clearly important to the founding fathers. The House of Representatives is elected every 2 years, which means that, perhaps almost to a fault, the House of Representatives members are always running for Congress. They're always running for the next election. Senators are only up every 6 years, and so only a third of them are up at a time, but it is still the case that senators do need to be responsive to their own people. And obviously, the presidency at a 4-year term, everybody knows that if you are not responsive to the people, then you will not get a second term. So it is ultimately up to the citizens to be the ones who control the government, and our citizenry do a terrible job of this. We're around 132 out of 178 in terms of countries, and people are not voting on their politicians and deciding whether or not they're doing a good job, then the Constitution is just not working.
And I love that framing. When we think about the three branches of government, that's kind of how we think about checks and balances. And you're really uplifting the most important check is the power of citizens. And so love that. And so why don't people vote?
Well, that's a good question, and there's actually probably a lot of reasons. There's been a lot of polling on this, and certainly we were talking about gerrymandering previously, and there are certain reasons people don't vote that are probably related to the sense that our system is very difficult to change, to get things done, and so people could be a little discouraged. However, a very significant portion of people are just too busy. I was recently at a street festival and I was talking to some friends, and I threw all my various ideas out, and this is the one they loved. They said, absolutely, we need a holiday for that day. People are busy, people are bringing their kids to school, then they're going to work, and then they're doing things after work. And the idea of going to their polling district and possibly standing in line, possibly having a hard time to parking. It is discouraging enough. So something like 18% of people responding to a poll said the reason they did not vote was that they were too busy. And so this is clearly something that is fixable. And as I noted before, most countries don't have the same problem we do. And most countries make it very easy for people to vote because the voting is on a day off. It's either on a Sunday, occasionally it's on perhaps both Saturdays and Sundays, or the day when it does fall on is a public holiday. And so we are the outlier when it comes to having a workday election day, and we're the outlier in terms of participation.
And I think you've mentioned before, it sounds like 65% of Americans are in favor of Election Day. So not just the street festival test, but across both parties, strong majorities in both parties being in support of the proposal. And so I guess I never thought of it before. I definitely kind of fall to prey of the responsibilities. I always end up voting, but it's like a mad rush at the end, despite other protections in place for me in California. But why do Americans vote on a workday? I guess I never questioned that before.
Well, that is really a historical anomaly that has never been rectified. It's actually kind of impressive that nobody has done anything about it. The reason why Election Day is on the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November was essentially because of farmers. Farmers, we used to be a much more agrarian, agricultural society. Farmers brought their produce to the market on Wednesday. Wednesday is market day. So that means that they probably arrive on Tuesday and they will be not selling their goods. And so on Tuesday, that would be the day that voting would happen in the central place where people went to vote. And now, this is, again, I'm saying, very historical. This is from many years ago, and it was something that probably went out of date 80, 70 or 80 years ago in terms of making any sense whatsoever. And today, of course, our agricultural sector is not a significant factor in needing to go to the marketplace on Wednesday. That is so beyond archaic that it's almost hard to understand that we still have this system. And so that is why the system was put into place as it was. And that is why we have a very difficult time for a lot of people to vote. Tuesdays are, not an obvious time to have people vote. And yet that's when we do our vote.
Yeah, that's amazing that from kind of like what agrarian society looked like in the 80s is how we still vote today, even though, like you're saying, that sector doesn't even operate in that way anymore. So it's really not serving anyone. So why hasn't Congress or why haven't the states addressed this issue? I assume they're both able to.
Exactly. So it is all over the place as to what states provide. There's really only 5 states that, such as Massachusetts and 4 others, who give off both a public holiday and paid leave to their own employees, and then paid leave required of private companies within the state. So that is obviously the most effective way to get not only everybody off, but also to make sure that they're getting paid for that day off. So that's only 5 states. A number of other states make it a public holiday. They might give their state employees off, but they wouldn't give private employees. Some just essentially close the banks and close some of their offices, but there are really not that many states who provide the kind of full time off that would be really important to get people out voting. And so why has the United States Congress not done this? Well, there is election law proposals introduced almost every single Congress, and they tend to be extremely expansive. This goes back a lot to the civil rights era and to voting being kind of ground zero for a lot of the struggles to get people who do not have political power, to get them voting and to get some kind of political power from those different groups. And these are such fraught with peril political questions, and they really go deep into what do states do, and what does the Constitution require, what do the courts say, that it is something that Congress rarely would have the ability to do significant legislation about. On the other hand, a separate bill just for a national holiday is something that does not get a lot of consideration. It's something that has a lot of support, and it's basically low-hanging fruit. So it is probably one of the best pieces of legislation that you could get passed relatively easily. But if you fold it in with other election reforms, then it would be very difficult to get it passed.
Yeah. And I definitely have felt what you're describing before in terms of like these sweeping bills that are very important in a lot of ways, but end up being so long that we lose some of the easier wins. And so I think part of what may make this complicated is like also the creation of a new federal national holiday. And so are there any proposals to like shift election day to current holidays or kind of change the makeup that way?
So that is one of the objections that has been raised, which is that this could cost up to $1 billion in federal employees, essentially paying them for work that they're not doing. And if it was extended to private businesses, then this could actually have a significant effect on the GDP, or not significant, but certainly a cognizable one, in that you'd probably have potentially about 15 billion in GDP reduction if you had everybody had a day off. So realistically, this is something that there's no particular reason it has to be on the day, separate day from a holiday. And it just turns out that Veterans Day usually comes very quickly after the day that is assigned to the election day. Veterans Day is actually set on November 11th, and so it would occasionally fall on a weekend. However, if that was the election day, it is currently a federal public holiday. Federal employees have off, some state employees, some private employees have off, but adding the election day, moving it probably less than a week out, would in fact give a holiday that would be both a remembrance of the sacrifices made for democracy by the military and would be an exercise of democracy on that particular day. So moving those two separate observances or those separate days into Veterans Day makes a whole lot of sense and probably has less economic impact than a brand new federal holiday.
That's really beautiful and poetic in a way. So love that idea of moving Election Day to Veterans Day as kind of the last tie-in to this proposal. So thanks so much, Ken. I think today we covered that what we all know, voting turnout in the U.S. is terrible, and we need to find ways to encourage people to vote as an important check to our systems of checks and balances for the government. And encouraging voter turnout is healthy for us. And so I think the final point is that people would welcome that opportunity, not just with a day off, but to use it in their exercise of democracy. So thanks for sharing this proposal with us today. And we'll come back next week with our 4th of 10 proposal. Thanks everybody for listening and for participating and for sharing your comments and likes and subscribes to our podcast. If you have any questions for us, please, you can always email us at production@constitutionpod.com. And we look forward to digging in on future proposals with you all. Thanks, Ken.
Thanks, Sadhana.